Your house is a fine little house, Jack.
Alright, yeah, this isn't The Last of Us. That's taken a bit of a back burner because of its length, but this is still the spooky month, and I guess technically the first horror movie in this channel, so I wanted to start with this little gem right here. And I can't get too far without addressing a couple things. One, just because I like this movie doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with all its messages. I like Von Trier's work a lot, but that doesn't mean that I'm a fan of his personal ideas. It seems like a no-brainer, but it still has to be said. I've always felt it's okay to enjoy an artist's work even if you don't support their views or lifestyle, and Lars Von Trier is definitely one of those cases for me. And if you haven't heard of him, I don't really blame you. His movies are not necessarily the most accessible, especially for mainstream market. I've seen all but 2 of his feature-length films, and before I get into this movie, I'll just say that if extreme content bothers you, like, don't even bother with most of his other movies. They're not all to the level of Antichrist. That movie is like the far end of the spectrum, and I wouldn't recommend that to most people as their first in his filmography. I do personally feel that Antichrist is my favorite of his, but if I'm suggesting a close second that's still strong, but not to that extent, then I'd probably encourage you to check out Melancholia or this movie right here, The House That Jack Built, if you're alright with a little gore. There will be spoilers in this discussion, but I'm telling you that I can't really spoil that much except for the ending and like the major set piece moment towards the later half. But besides that, there's not too much to spoil. If you don't know anything about this movie, well, I mean, just look at the poster. It pretty much tells you everything right there. I mean, like, look at those glasses, the coat, the haircut. Come on, it's not exactly subtle. If I had to boil this down, this movie, while like pretty much most of Von Trier's work is more in service as a vehicle for Lars to project his own ideas of morals and opinions on the world, which is okay. Literally every story to some extent is a writer's platform to do just that. No problems with that, even if some of their ideas are just morally controversial.
All the icons that have had and always will have an impact on the world are, for me, extravagant art.
What matters to me, especially looking at a movie, like for reviewing purposes, is how well it presents those ideas. And that's one thing I'll give to Von Trier. He's really great in the presentation. I've really barely ever been bored watching most of his movies, like just watching it on its own, like Melancholia and Antichrist. They're like looking at moving paintings. They're breathtaking, like amazingly shot. And if long stretches of monologues bother you, also don't bother with this movie. A really great test. And I know this is random, but it's spooky, so it also fits. Actually, I would recommend that if this doesn't seem like your cup of tea, then check this show out. Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass on Netflix. Genuinely a masterpiece, but if you have trouble sitting through that show with his long monologues, you probably won't last long here. Granted, Midnight Mass has much better written dialogue than The House That Jack Built. Before you go into this movie, and I still tell myself this on rewatches every year, you have to go into this with an open mind, yes, but like also just a lot of patience. This is not a well-balanced movie in terms of its tone, and the heavy-handed monologues do feel disproportionate to the actual movie content itself. I know it sounds like I'm going over the place right now, but I'm just trying to hammer in the point that this is just not for everyone. And I just don't mean social commentary stuff. I mean the way that it's presented. If you're not into slow burn, dialogue-heavy movies to this length, then I'd honestly tell you not to waste your time. One more tidbit here. For this review, I'm basing this off the director's cut, which is really, it's not at all necessary for a first viewing. Unless you just want more gore, that's the extent of it. There's just more blood, that's it. Or like a couple shots of like seeing a cut of something. Yeah, I'm not gonna say what, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so the purpose of picking this particular title for this month is an attempt to maybe recommend something a little outside the box from your traditional Halloween lineup. I know I missed out big on not reviewing Saw X, trust me, it's coming, though. I'm terribly obsessed with the ludicrousy of that series. But I just want to talk about something a little different, and this movie, it is a challenge, and I want that. Part of the challenge is to say everything that I want to, but in the case where I'm trying to say I really enjoy this, but I don't agree with the points it's trying to push, and that's possible. And that's really hard to translate, but here we go. The House That Jack Built, released in 2018, directed by controversial filmmaker Lars Von Trier. Our main lead is Jack, a narcissistic, psychopathic OCD serial killer discussing incidents from his past with Verge, who is a figment of Jack's imagination, but as the audience, we can kind of interpret Verge to be his voice of reason. He's like a physical manifestation of his lack of a conscience. He's having a discussion with his Jiminy Cricket, and that's Verge. The setup is more along the lines of a light anthology. It's on 5 separate incidents in Jack's life, assumingly the most important events that ultimately lead to where Jack is by the end of the movie. The main thread carrying us through these stories is that Jack is quite literally going to hell. These aren't placed in any particular order in how they occurred, save for the end. They're taken out of varying places in Jack's life, each having their own unique purpose to Jack's argument. He's trying to explain himself, but as Verge mentions in the beginning, it's more a compulsion to confess his crimes along the journey to the afterlife/hell. And for context, if you haven't seen this, it's really, give you a second, it's not that dissimilar to American Psycho. Calm, stay calm. That movie is unmatched. I'm just saying that as a movie focused on a serial killer, American Psycho is one of the closer examples that came to my mind. They're both fictional, unreliable narrators with social commentary and dark humor. They have similar themes, I should say. One aspect that I really cannot critique much here is the acting. It's amazing. 10 out of 10. Amazing job. Matt Dillon, you have convinced me that I should not let you within 10 feet of me or my pets. And not that this is, entirely credible to you, because you don't really know me, but just from my end, the people that I have watched this with who have gone to school for behavioral science have told me from their opinions that this is a very well adapted depiction of a psychopath, and I believe them. And if you guys don't, I mean, accurate or not, just watching Jack, it's effective. Regardless, accurate or not, it's really effective at what it's trying to do and convey. Like stranger in danger and everything, but he feels like a good reminder that sometimes you just never know. And I'm not sure if this is more a writing or an acting praise, but one great little detail that I appreciated more in rewatches is that for Jack, we get a lot of scenes of him practicing lines and facial expressions that a person with emotions normally would. He has to practice that though, and not just to attract his victims, but to be able to adapt to different situations and people he comes across. As the audience, when we see him talk with most of the other characters minus Verge, we know that Jack is faking pretty much all of it. But the other people, they don't, at least not until the very end. And watching that shift happen so effectively between each of the different incidents was, to me, really effective, but also impressive that they were able to keep that so engaging for as long as this movie is.
If you feel like screaming, I definitely think that you should.
And that's the big hook I was looking for. Fuck, finally, thank God. I had the idea up here, just trying to get it out there. I'm still working on that. Losing my fucking mind. I can watch this movie, tolerate some of the preachy bullshit, but ultimately I'm taking most of my enjoyment from the acting and these little vignette moments in Jack's life. Seeing that journey by itself on top of the pretty good visuals, I enjoyed the actual movie footage. There's a lot of reused stuff, so stock footage, like historical footage, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that. It's literally just because those moments are phrased like a video essay. It's it's like YouTube shit. It's like, okay, we all do that. We all use stock footage, and it's fine. But they do kind of bring the pace of the movie down a little bit, just because I'm watching this movie, but I'm still essentially watching a bit of a TED Talk / slideshow. So Verge is the only other main character in the movie that we come back to pretty often towards the end, and the late Bruno Ganz, I think I'm saying that right. He's wonderful. I think he's great. Uma Thurman too, Riley Keough, Jeremy Davies, all also just great job. They did awesome. But they're not focused on that much. Most of the side characters besides Jack and Verge aren't really talked about much at all. They're just there to service their morbid duty. We'll put it that way. And I've approached it a couple different ways. And if you're anything like me and you are interested in seeing this for a first time, I really urge you not to take everything literally. Like I said, Von Trier uses his characters as a vehicle to relay most of his ideas, and compared to his other movies, not really. There's a really strong case against this, but this one's also pretty on the nose, and his ideas are very bonkers. Jack's / Von Trier's. I'm not assuming this. It doesn't take much research on the director to find out that he's not exactly right in the head, his movies aside. But that's what he does. He wants to appall you and have these images and scenes stay with you long after you finish the movie. So for me, at this point, when I watch this movie, I see it purely from an objective angle. Everything that's being said, I take it as coming from Jack as the character, as someone who is mentally unstable and finds comfort and art in all the fucked up shit that he does. But the reverse side to this, can actually be really engaging as well. After the fourth incident in this movie, that's where more of the monologue exchanges between Verge and Jack start to play. And Verge actually acts as, for the most part, a pretty good counterpart to Jack, in that Verge is kind of like Jack's remaining line to humanity. They have drastically different opinions on Jack's actions, and regardless, it's unavoidable, but if you do have the patience and you enjoy listening to other people's opinions, there is this entertaining dynamic as part of the audience to have this debate on Jack/Von Trier's ideas on ethics and what defines art. You know, it's a little bit of self-projection, but you can't help but think, at least for me, like, how would I respond to Jack, or to counter his points, or how would you? That can add more reasons to rewatch this if you find that portion to this movie to be something worth revisiting. That's not always been the case for me. Bottom line, I do find Jack to be a pretty interesting character to just watch and study. It's a compelling view into a person's life who finds murder to be just as beautiful as the Sistine Chapel.
The noble rot.
Stop it.
I may not agree with it, and that's fine, I'm glad I don't. But overall, I do find Jack's journey to be pretty engrossing. So the incidents Jack talks about are ones that really stick out to him the most. With how this movie is framed, I think it can also be taken as Jack's life flashing before his eyes, because these 5 cases aren't the only people Jack has killed. In the second to last chapter, Jack mentions having killed at least 60 people by that point in time, and I think all the chapters do feel to have a place within Jack's intent to explain himself. But I think for sure the third incident is one that most people are going to have a hard time getting through. I know I still do, and it's a movie, I know it's fake, but it's still pretty touchy. But it's a good scene to really divide the audience and reserving less sympathy for Jack, if any. It's kind of like the bottom line moment. If you kind of agreed with some of his thinking up until then, or were just like, okay, I see it. Okay, I think I kind of see from your fucked up way that I understand that. That moment is when I think most people would really start to feel differently, which Verge reacts pretty much on point to how most of us would. His repulsion to Jack's crime is like a splint. No matter how far Jack goes, Verge is like his voice of reason, his Jiminy Cricket, to bring everything back to reality. Not that it works, but he's there. He calls him out and challenges his views and fundamentals. Do I think this movie goes too far with jock value? Not at all. This is very disturbing for sure, but there is much worse. And just from my takeaway, the shocking content isn't baseless. This is what Jack does, and we're observing that from the outside. And to me, towards the end, before the epilogue, I did get a sense that Jack was also just plainly losing his mind. And I don't take all of his bullshit of praising mass murderers as icons to be something I think he completely believed in himself. That's just my impression though, because there is this noticeable, albeit subtle, change from the start to the movie for Jack until he's led into hell. At the start, he talks a lot about wanting to build a house, his desire and passion to do architecture, positive traits which we could see if Jack didn't have this, bloodlust, that he could have maybe had a different outcome. And the more crimes that Jack commits, the deeper into his obsession that he falls into, the passion for architecture starts to be mentioned less and less, until Verge points that very detail out, and I think that's a fantastic turning point for Jack's character. It's still fucked up, but in getting to where Jack finally builds the house that he's been wanting, it fits. It's fucked, but it fits. The last chapter to this movie, Catabasis, which I think is a wonderful title for that, and the epilogue I think is a really great segment here. This is where the best moments visually are shown, so a lot of beautiful frames and slow motion shots. I mentioned the music before, but here I really like the orchestral tracks. They do reuse themes a lot, especially a piece by from Glenn Gould, which I had no idea about. I had no idea that was even a person. But I'm glad I know now, because his music is actually really nice. I like the way that he plays. And that video that they play several times throughout the movie is it's very cool. I like that piece. Look it up on YouTube. Actually, I'll link it in the description below. It's amazing to see how passionate he is while playing, and I love that. Reused a lot or not, after listening to Jack for the past 2.5 hours, in the epilogue, it's a nice break, but the imagery does a lot to convey Jack's thoughts and mental state with coming to terms with his actions and consequences. For the first time in this movie, we actually see just a hint of guilt, but not even guilt. The scene that I'm talking about is when Verge shows Jack the Elysian Fields, which is basically, if you've seen Gladiator, you'll know what I'm talking about. The Elysian Fields is like heaven. It's the afterlife. And I think it was just a beautiful, poetic way to say that he missed out on happiness in the afterlife, because the one image that he's seeing, his version of the Elysian Fields, is just men just like using scythes to cut the grass, cut the weeds, whatever it is, Jesus. As a kid, that was something that he really took enjoyment in, was just listening to the adults. As a child, working the land and just cutting the grass with their scythes, and that to see that as his heaven of what could have been, and seeing him emotionally react to that is wonderful. I think that's a great, it's like, we hate Jack because of what he's doing, and that's like a nice little revenge from us, from the audience, to be like, yeah, fuck you, you don't deserve this. Another great element that I think this movie does really well at, ironically, its dark sense of humor. If you really, and I mean really, like dark humor, then you'll definitely get a kick out of this. If you laugh at Patrick Bateman, you'll have some good moments with Jack, trust me. The first and second chapters have some of the best comedic moments. Granted, it's messed up because you know it's about to happen, but watching Jack awkwardly work his way into building trust with some people or seeing him suffer under his severely intense case of OCD it's almost mesmerizing. I know that's a strong word to describe that, but I swear it's really something. A serial killer with OCD, you'd think that would have its benefits. You know, there's no trace of evidence left, but for Jack, that's not the case at all. It's more of a hindrance. And I like how it's not really the police he has to worry about, but it's more himself. He is the biggest liability for his crimes. This movie is heavy, and I don't just mean with violence. It's just a lot of information to listen to for this runtime. But if you're into it and it's clicking, then you won't feel the length as much. I've seen this quite a few times, and it's never been a slog to sit through as of yet. I know this video is much shorter than recent posts, but a family matter came up, and I did want to squeeze in a vid before the end of the month. I'll be going back to a little longer format in the next couple of posts. For sake of workload, I might start mixing it up to alternate between the two. I think if that can work, I can push back for 2 uploads a week. I just felt to mention that because I know this isn't as long as my recent posts. I'm not done with this movie. All these points I mentioned, I feel like could be fleshed out into their own videos. I think this post is more like to get the word out there, and I do think this movie deserves a little more attention. Von Trier has a certain stigma attached with his movies, but to me, the most egregious case, from what I feel people get the most turned off by, is more present in Nymphomaniac, which, as interesting a premise as it is, it felt like a chore. I will return. This isn't the end for Jack. I've loved watching people analyze this character and the movie. Check out the Vile Eyes Analyzing Evil series or Ryan Hollinger's analysis. Great stuff. For now though, let me give you my 2 cents in the rating. The House That Jack Built, for me, is a solid 4 stars out of 5. I know that seems pretty high, but when I first saw this, it stood around like a 3 or 2.5, honestly. But this is a movie that I've grown to appreciate more on more viewings. It wasn't something I fell in love with right away, and I think some people might feel the same. It's like drinking coffee, you know, it's not for everyone. And I do feel this is a movie you have to give at least a second watch in order to maybe have more of a connection, because it is a lot to take in for the first time.
That's what she said.
Oh, fuck off. Yeah, I know, it's a lot, but you know, the ride to the end has always been enjoyable for me, and sadly, it seems like this might be Von Trier's last movie, with his current state struggling with Parkinson's. That really sucks. He's a curious little fellow, even if he's insane, and I may not agree with him. I'd love for him to make more movies. If he only has 1 movie left in him, I'd love for it to be maybe like a memoir of sorts, or something much more grounded, or something more accessible to where more people could have a better chance to discover some of his work. But if this is it, The House That Jack Built, to me, is a perfectly fine send-off, especially with its ending, which is just hilarious and ranks as one of the best endings to a movie I've ever seen. It might be the best, honestly. It's fucking hilarious.
I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect.
So if any of you folks have seen or maybe feel like your interest is piqued enough to check this out, please let me hear your thoughts. It's controversial, so opinions are going to widely vary, but regardless, I'd love to hear what you guys think. The goal of this was not to convince you that this is objectively good, but more I wanted to tell you why I like this, and if you go in prepared with what to expect, then maybe there's a chance that you could too. Thank you guys for watching. All critiques, comments, concerns,
You gotta say it!
complaints are welcome. Fire away in the comments section. Give me your worst. It's all right. Don't worry, I'm not making a promise with the next video. I'll get better at that. Right now, though, I'm just afraid that I'll just jinx myself into the same situation with The Last of Us. So let's slow it down. Next video, just it may be that or just something completely different. But you'll have to stick around to find out for sure. Not for this movie, but like the next video. Anyways, I suck at bits. You guys have a great one. Bye.